There are moments so subtle, you almost miss them. Nothing dramatic happens. No event, no warning, no reason. And still, something shifts. You might be standing somewhere ordinary, waiting for a light, sitting in silence, watching nothing in particular. And then, for a fraction of a second, the obvious stops feeling obvious. It doesn't become louder. It becomes clearer. Almost like something inside you steps back and looks, not at the world, but at the fact that you are in it. And then it appears, not as a thought, but as a quiet recognition. I'm here. And for a brief moment, that feels unexpectedly strange. And if you don't rush away from that moment, something else begins to unfold. Not outside, inside. You start noticing things that were always happening, but never really seen. Your body, for example, it's here, breathing, existing, without asking you. Your heart is beating, without waiting for permission. Your lungs expand and contract, again and again. And you realize something strange. You are not doing this. It's just happening. And then another layer appears. Thoughts. They arrive without invitation. One idea becomes another, then another, and if you look closely, you never chose the first one. It simply appeared, just like the breath, just like the heartbeat. And in the middle of all this, there is something else. Something quieter, more subtle, watching, not interfering, not reacting, just aware. And for a brief moment, you don't feel like the body. You don't feel like the thoughts. You feel like the one noticing them. And if you stay with this a little longer, the question changes. It's no longer just, I'm here. It becomes, what is this that is here? Because something doesn't quite fit. You are inside a body, made of matter, the same matter that exists everywhere. Atoms, energy, patterns. Nothing special at first glance. And yet, this arrangement is aware. that's where it becomes strange. Because for billions of years, the universe existed without being noticed. Stars formed, collapsed, expanded into silence. Galaxies moved without anyone watching. And then, somehow, matter began to organize in a different way, complex enough to feel, to think, to know that it exists. And now, through you, the universe is not just happening. It is being noticed. Not in theory, not as an idea, but directly, right now. And that realization is not loud. It doesn't explain itself, but it changes something in the way everything feels. But something else happens almost immediately. You lose it. Not completely, but enough. The moment fades, and the usual movement returns. You go back to thinking, planning, reacting, becoming someone again. And this is not a mistake. It's part of it. Because staying in that awareness all the time would change everything. Too much, maybe. There is something about being human that requires forgetting. Not permanently, but rhythmically. You remember, and then you fall back into the story. Again, and again. You wake up in the morning, and the world is already waiting. Things to do, messages, expectations, and slowly, that quiet awareness gets covered, not destroyed, just layered. And without noticing, you return to living, as if you already knew what this is. As if existence was obvious again. But every now and then, it breaks through. In the middle of something simple, a pause, a silence, a gap between thoughts. And suddenly, you remember, without knowing how. And at some point, a different kind of question begins to form. Not about what you should do, or where you should go, but something more subtle. What does this mean? What is all of this for? Because once you notice that you are here, truly here, it becomes almost impossible not to ask why. And the mind does what it always does. It starts searching for answers, for explanations, for something that can hold this question. It builds ideas, stories, beliefs, trying to give shape to something that feels too vast. But the deeper the question goes, the quieter everything becomes. Because some questions don't return answers. They return space. And that space can feel uncomfortable. Like something is missing or unresolved. But maybe nothing is missing. Maybe the discomfort comes from expecting clarity where there is none to give. Because existence doesn't explain itself. It simply unfolds. And the more you try to force an answer, the further it seems to move. Like trying to hold water with closed hands. So maybe the question was never meant to be solved. And maybe something shifts, not when you find an answer, but when you stop chasing one. Because there is a moment, almost imperceptible, when the mind slows down. Not forced, not controlled. It just loses interest in solving, in defining, in turning everything into something it can understand. And in that gap, something else becomes visible. Not as a concept, not as a conclusion, but as a direct experience. You're still here, but now there is less noise between you and what is happening. The air feels clearer. Sounds feel closer. Time slows down. Not outside, but in the way you perceive it. And nothing extraordinary is happening. No revelation. No dramatic change. Just this moment, without resistance. Without needing to become anything else. And maybe that's why it feels so unfamiliar. Because most of the time, we are not actually here. We are somewhere else. In thought. In projection. In something that hasn't happened or already ended. But now, there is just this. And for a moment, that's enough. And maybe this is what was always being pointed at. Not something far, not something hidden, but something overlooked. Because there is a tendency in the mind to believe that meaning must be somewhere else. In the future, in achievement, in becoming something more. But what if that movement itself is what keeps you away? There were thinkers who tried to describe this, but language always fell short. Not because they didn't understand, but because understanding this is not something you explain. It's something you notice. Right here, in things that seem too simple to matter. The sound of something distant, light touching a surface. The feeling of being without needing to define it. And maybe that's why so much of life passes unnoticed. Because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It just happens. Quietly, continuously, without asking to be understood. There is a kind of clarity that doesn't come from thinking more, but from not interfering, from allowing this moment to be exactly what it is. And maybe that is closer to meaning than anything the mind has been searching for. So maybe the strange feeling of being alive was never a problem to solve, but something to notice, something that appears in the middle of everything else, quietly, without asking permission, without needing to be understood. And maybe you don't need to hold on to it, because it was never something you could lose. It disappears only when you stop looking, and returns when something in you becomes still enough to notice again. Not as an idea, not as a conclusion, but as a simple recognition. I am here. Not as a thought, but as a fact. That doesn't need to be explained. And maybe that is enough. Axis Soul.